Today we're going to do something extraordinary. In less than 30 minutes, you will learn everything about the Tractate of Berachot, its 9 chapters, its structure, its central ideas, and its spiritual significance. Not fragments, not loose comments, not isolated definitions, the complete picture. Because when you understand the structure, everything else makes sense. Berakhot is not just an ancient text. It is the manual that transforms daily life into an act of spiritual awareness. It is the treatise that replaced the temple sacrifice with human speech. It is the work that took every everyday gesture, eating, waking up, walking, looking at the sky, and turned it into a moment of connection with the divine. Here is the question that guides our class. Can a blessing change the way we see the world? Today we will see that it can. We will see how the Jewish people learned to transform time, space, food, and experience into a relationship with God. And when we finish, you will be able to say, I understand Berakhot now. Not the details, the complete design. This is Abel Flores, always grateful that you are here studying with us. Let's begin. So, to begin, let's provide some context, because without context, there is no truth. Behind me, you can see agricultural fields of the land of Israel, because the Mishnah, that Hebrew encyclopedia of ancestral biblical knowledge, is divided into 6 orders, Zeraim, or sections, and the first is called in Hebrew Zeraim, which means seeds. That is, the first section of the Mishnah basically deals with the agricultural laws of the land of Israel according to the Torah of Moses. Now, imagine for a moment that you open the Mishnah for the first time. The logical thing would be to find agricultural laws, because that's what seeds are about. However, the first page surprises you with something different, almost poetic. The Tractate of Berachot, that is, the first tractate of Zeraim, deals with blessings. And that's where the question that captivates the mind arises. Why does a tractate on prayer and blessings inaugurate a section dedicated to agricultural tithes, to the land, to the Shemitah, or sabbatical year? That small dissonance is an invitation to spiritual reflection that leaves us in suspense for now. And here is a key verse to understand all this, located in Deuteronomy 8:3, which says, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. I think we are beginning to understand, because the first tractate, the agricultural one that gives us material roots in the land of Israel, in the nation, begins with blessings, with the spiritual world. So Berakhot is the only exception in Zeraim, and yet it is the one that opens the way. That is, we begin the study of the Mishnah with an exception, and we will find many more, because we will study exceptional cases that will open our understanding of the spiritual laws that the Torah gives us. The Mishnah seems to tell us that before talking about fields, seeds, and agricultural cycles, we must talk about the human voice. Everyday Judaism begins not with the hands that work the land, but with the mouth that rises to God. That is why Berakhot begins the series, because the first thing is not the external action, but the inner relationship. The Shema, the prayers, the blessings, they are the sowing of the soul before any harvest. We must also understand that the Mishnah was written in the 2nd century of the Common Era. And even at that time, the Second Temple had been destroyed, and the people were in dispersion. They had no land, but they did have a soul that never forgot God. Although the name of the tractate is Berakhot, blessings, the tractate covers 3 main sections. The Shema Israel, chapters 1-3, when it is recited, how, in what posture, with what kavanah, intention, interruptions, etc. Tefillah Amidah, chapters 4-5, times, versions, concentration, behavior during prayer, and Berakhot in the strict sense, chapters 6-9, blessings over food, scents, events, places, experiences, Birkat Hamazon, blessings of praise upon seeing lightning, thunder, mountains, the sea, etc. Behind all the halakhic details are several underlying ideas. Human speech has spiritual weight. Blessing, reciting the Shema, praying, is not an empty ritual, but a way of acknowledging divine sovereignty. Daily life is a space for encountering God, eating, smelling, traveling, seeing natural phenomena, experiencing joyful or painful events. Everything is framed with Berakhot. Time is sacred. There are specific zmanim, times for prayers and recitations, which order the day and connect the person with the temple and the korbanot. sacrifices. Kavanah, intention, and respect. It is not enough to simply say the words. Concentration, modesty, behavior, and the dignity of the act before God are all important. Now we begin with Chapter 1, Times for Reciting the Shema. Berakhot 1. This chapter defines when the evening and morning Shema are recited, and how strict the timing is. It is based on the biblical phrase, when you lie down and when you rise up. The Mishnah begins with the Shema because it is the most important commandment in the Torah, along with love your neighbor as yourself. So, the most important thing takes priority, and that is why it begins with faith in the monotheism of the Bible. Mishnah 1:1 discusses the evening Shema, from the time the Kohanim, priests, can eat their teruma, offering, until midnight or Amud HaShahar, dawn, according to different opinions. Here, the debate between the sages and Rabban Gamliel regarding the latest time the mitzvah can be fulfilled is presented. Following Mishnah, morning Shema, from when one can distinguish between blue and white, or other color combinations, until the third hour of the day. Differences between the preferred time and the latest possible time. Order of the sections of the Shema, Va'ahabta, Vahaya im Shemoa, Vayomer, and the reason for that order. Accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, then the yoke of the commandments, then remembering the mitzvot. The analysis of this chapter concludes that when you lie down and when you rise up refers to specific time frames, linking the recitation to the rhythms of the temple and the day. The tension between lechatchila, the ideal way, and bediavad, post facto fulfillment, is introduced. These topics are discussed in the Gemara. The idea is introduced that each part of the day has its spiritual significance, and that reciting the Shema within the prescribed time is not the same as reciting it outside of that time. Although one who does so still fulfills the commandment, it is with less merit, according to the sages. Chapter 2 discusses the form and quality of the recitation of the Shema, how the Shema should be recited, posture, body direction, level of concentration, articulation, interruptions. In its main content, discussion of whether it should be recited sitting, standing, lying down, or in any other position, and the dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. The requirement of kavanah, intention, at least in the first verse, Shema Israel. Proper pronunciation of the words. Being careful not to incorrectly combine or separate the letters. Interruptions out of respect for a king or a robber, and the difference between the first section and subsequent sections. In the analysis, it is reaffirmed that the mitzvah is not mechanical. The intention, kavanah, is an integral part of its fulfillment. The halakha, Jewish law, follows Beit Hillel. The Torah does not require uncomfortable postures, but rather continuous recitation within the routine of daily life. The relationship with human authority, king or robber, is measured against divine authority, when one may and when one may not interrupt. Chapter 3 deals with exemptions and obligations. Its central theme is who is exempt from Shema and or tefillah due to concerns, afflictions, or mandatory tasks. Its main content is about Jewish weddings in the time of the Second Temple, and it indirectly refers to the wedding of Rabbi Gamliel. From this, we learn that there are several groups of people who are exempt. The groom on the first night is exempt from the Shema due to concerns about the marriage. Also, city guards, workers on trees or walls, and people in uncomfortable or dangerous situations are not required to recite the Shema. People in mourning or at a funeral procession, exemptions and limitations. It distinguishes between Shema, Torah, and tefillah, rabbinic institution, in terms of requirements under certain circumstances. The analysis concludes that this chapter 3 demonstrates the sensitivity of halakha to human psychology. Intense worry can negate the ability to have kavanah, proper intention. It does not seek abstract rigor, but rather a realistic application, recognizing emotional burdens and social obligations, marriage, mourning, safety. It shows the principle that not every situation allows for the same spiritual demands. That is, even the most important commandment of the Torah of Moses, the Shema Israel, which must be recited twice a day, upon going to bed and upon rising, has exceptions for those who must fulfill it. Upon reaching chapter 4, the discussion focuses on the schedules and structure of the tefillah, basically the Amidah, which is the main prayer of Rabbinic Judaism. It is mentioned that in the days of the Tanaim, or the sages of the Mishnah, this prayer was called the Shema Esrei, which translates to 18. The central theme defines the times for the daily prayers and their relationship to the temple sacrifices or to the times of day. Its main points are Shacharit times until Chatzot Hayom, or until the 4th hour, opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Mincha times until nightfall, or until Pelag HaMincha, according to one opinion. Arvit, without a strict limit, it can be recited all night with nuances. Musaf, for Shabbat, holidays, and Rosh Chodesh, all day or until the 7th hour, according to different opinions. Discussion on the number of daily prayers and the possibility of additional voluntary prayers. Relationship between prayers and korbanot, sacrifices, or between prayers and times of day, dawn, afternoon, night. The analysis concludes the following. Prayer is conceived as a substitute for the sacrifices after the destruction of the temple. Although it is not necessarily a substitution, but rather a correlation, because even when the temple stood, people prayed in the synagogue. The Lord's Prayer, that prayer that Jesus taught his disciples, is an example that even when the temple was standing, people still prayed to God several times a day. In fact, from this we learn that the Lord's Prayer is a short version of the Amidah, known in those days as Havinenu. On the other hand, it is also concluded that the organization of the Jewish day is structured around these prayers, marking spiritual rhythms. The tensions between ideal fulfillment and minimum fulfillment appear, which will later be fundamental in daily halakha and in the following treatises to be studied throughout the Mishnah and the Talmud. This chapter teaches fundamental halakhic principles and rabbinic interpretations that are essential to the structure of Judaism as we know it today. Chapter 5 delves into the concept of kavanah, reverence, and proper conduct during prayer, tefillah. The central theme is the internal quality, kavanah, and appropriate external behavior during the Amidah. The most salient points in its main content are recommendation to begin prayer with words of mercy, verses of praise or introspection, importance of humility and reverent awe, standing as if before a king, prohibition against praying while angry, intoxicated, or extremely distracted, physical conduct, feet together, upright posture, low voice, avoiding gestures or distractions, stories of sages who prepared themselves before praying, and even interrupted important tasks for prayer. This chapter contains one of the most famous and controversial Mishnayot in the entire Talmud, which is about the snake that wraps itself around the heel of someone praying the Amidah. After the analysis, several conclusions are drawn. The focus shifts from the when to the how internally. Berakhot not only dictates schedules, but also spiritual quality. Tefillah is a formal encounter with God, which demands emotional and mental discipline. Prayer should not become a mechanical routine. There is a constant emphasis on renewing kafana and a call to fight against routine. Now, in chapter 6, we begin to discuss other topics, the blessings over food, basic classification. The central theme is which blessings are recited before eating different types of food, and how the relationship between the main food, ikar, and the secondary food, tefil, is handled. The classification of the preliminary blessings is as follows. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, over bread. Borei mine mizonot, for certain products derived from grains. Borei peri haetz, for tree fruits. Borei peri ha'adama, for products of the earth. Shehakol nihya bidvaro, for all other foods. Now, the principle of ikar and tefil means that if there is a main food and a secondary food that accompanies it, the blessing is recited only over the main food, and the secondary food is included. Classic examples: bread with salt or side dishes. Mixed foods. In cases of doubt as to whether a product is considered tree or earth according to its growth, either shehakol or borei peri ha'adama is recited. The analysis of this chapter transforms the everyday act of eating into a systematic act of recognition. The classification of blessings reflects a hierarchical view of food, linked to its origin and its fundamental importance. The ikar tafel principle is key not only for food, but also as a conceptual model. The secondary is defined in relation to the primary. This is a law of interpretation in Hebrew jurisprudence that would influence the entire Talmud and halakhic rulings for centuries. Chapter 7 studies the blessings over food and Birkat Hamazon. The central theme is completing the cases of blessings over food and introducing the topic of Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after eating bread. The main content is discussion of specific foods and their appropriate blessings, including questions about certain borderline cases. Introduction to Birkat Hamazon, the obligation to bless after eating bread until one is satisfied, based on "and you shall eat, be satisfied, and bless," as written by the prophet Moses. Distinction between obligations from the Torah and those from the sages, i.e. Deraita and Derabanan, a topic that had already been touched upon several times since the first chapter of Berakhot. The concept of zimun is also discussed. When 3 or more people eat together, they are called upon to bless jointly. Differences in the formula according to the number of participants: 3, 10, 100, 1,000, up to 10,000. After the analysis, several conclusions are drawn. The focus shifts from the blessing before eating, prior acknowledgement, to the blessing afterward, subsequent gratitude. Birkat Hamazon crystallizes the idea that material satiety demands gratitude and is a commandment of the Torah of Moses. Zimun emphasizes the communal dimension of gratitude. Eating is not only an individual act, but also a social and spiritual one. At this point, we've reached the halfway mark of this class, and we're taking a short break to let you know that if you're willing to make a donation, you can do so by scanning the QR code you see on the screen or by clicking the link below in the video description. Personally, I, Abel Flores, sincerely thank you for your contribution, as it greatly helps us continue producing all of this content, which is provided free of charge. In Chapter 8, which is the penultimate chapter of this wonderful treatise on Berakhot, the structural details of Birkat Hamazon, the fundamental prayer after a meal, are discussed. This prayer is a direct commandment from the Torah of Moses. The central theme analyzes the structural development of Birkat Hamazon: number of blessings, content, and special situations. Its main topics are classic structure and 4 Berakhot, referring to the 4 blessings of Birkat Hamazon: Hazan et Ha'olam, God who sustains all; Al Haaretz ve'al Hamazon, gratitude for the land and the food; Boneh Yerushalayim, petition for the reconstruction of Jerusalem; Hatov ve'Hametiv, additional goodness of God, originally added after Beder, and it deals with the resurrection of the dead, meaning there is a link between bread and resurrection. Rules regarding special inclusions, adding Yale ve'Yavo on Rosh Chodesh and holidays, inserting Retzeh on Shabbat. Special cases: eating, doubting whether Birkat Hamazon was recited, whether to repeat it or not, and who can include whom in the zimun, men, women, slaves, etc., with their different opinions. The analysis of this chapter reveals an example of how the experience of eating connects with universal sustenance, Hazan et Ha'olam, land of Israel, Jerusalem, and the temple, history of the Jewish people, persecutions, salvations, and the resurrection. That is, it is a direct allusion to the Messianic era. Birkat Hamazon becomes a theological summary of the covenant: food, land, holy city, and permanent divine goodness when a seed, like Zeraim, needs to die. That is, to be sown in the earth as if buried, to bear fruit, to resurrect. This is the logical order of everything we are studying. Do you remember this teaching from someone else? The teaching, that is, Mishnah, because that's what Mishnah means in Hebrew, teaching of Jesus or Yeshua about the seed that dies to bear fruit, according to the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 24, basically recounts what is studied here in this first treatise of Berakhot. And although this may surprise you, the historical reality is that Jesus was a Tannanite teacher, that is, from the time of the Mishnah, and everything that is recounted in these treatises is basically the historical context in which Jesus and his apostles lived, taught, and debated. Wonderful? Well, this is just the beginning, and remember to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. You can subscribe to our channel and find the playlist where we have the entire Mishnah, this whole treatise of Berakhot, class by class, and study it in more depth, chapter by chapter. Because what we're doing today is basically a review in just 30 minutes. And we finally arrive at chapter 9, the last chapter of this treatise on Berakhot. And here we address the blessings of praise and those related to special events. The central theme here is expanding the concept of blessings to natural phenomena, experiences, places, and extreme situations, both positive and negative. So as we see, this treatise no longer deals with temporal or specific prayers, nor with food, but rather with special blessings, not tied to specific times or unique circumstances, such as seeing a rainbow or the sea. The main content is blessings upon seeing, lightning, thunder, mountains, seas, deserts, places of miracles for Israel or personal miracles, blessings upon events, good news, Hatov v'hem he who is good and does good. Bad news, Dayan Hayamet, the true judge. Blessings upon entering or leaving dangerous cities, ruins, places charged with historical memory. Blessings for special situations, pleasant scents, myrrh, spices, etc., according to different versions. Rules regarding formulas of praise and cursing, not using inappropriate expressions about God, even in moments of anger or pain. The analysis reveals that this chapter extends blessings to the entire fabric of life, nature and history, the pleasant and the painful, the private and the public. A spiritual map of the world is created. Every phenomenon can and should be interpreted spiritually, with an appropriate formula. The central idea, Rabbinic Judaism, is not limited to the temple or the synagogue. The entire world is a space for relationship with God, mediated by the word of blessing. Now that we have completed a brief overview of each of the 9 chapters of Berakhot, allow me to take you, for these few minutes, to a scene that forever changed the spiritual life of the Jewish people. Imagine the silence after the destruction of the temple, where the fire of the sacrifices once burned. Now only the question remains: how to continue dialoguing with God when the physical center of the encounter has disappeared. And there appears Berakhot, almost like an invisible architect, who says, if the temple fell, we will build a new one, made of words. Because that is its genius. The treatise understands that life cannot remain without a sanctuary, and so it decides that prayer and blessings will be the new pillars. No carved stone is needed. A mouth that speaks, a heart that listens is enough, and thus daily life is transformed into a portable sacred space. Berakhot organizes the Jewish day with surprising precision. It begins with the Shema, that intimate proclamation of divine kingship that we whisper as we go to sleep and repeat upon waking, as if God were the first and the last word of each day. Then come the tefillot, the formal encounters, shacharit to open our eyes, mincha to stop the dizziness of the afternoon, arvit to surrender to the night, and musaf when the calendar marks a holiday. And around all this, like small flashes of light, the Berakhot, a constant invitation to recognize what we eat, what we see, what we feel. But Berakhot is not a rigid treatise. The sages observe real life with the same attention they observe the law. They acknowledge fatigue, fear, illness, hard work. And then they allow exceptions, soften demands, adapt the norm without breaking it. They remind us that halakha is not a wall that encloses, but a bridge that accompanies human beings in their fragility. The treatise concludes with a vision that seems profoundly poetic to me. The entire world transformed into a path marked by blessings, before and after eating, upon seeing a tree blossom or a thunderclap shake the sky, upon receiving good news and also bad news, because even pain needs a framework of meaning. When recalling collective history or the intimate chapters of our own lives. In short, Berakhot teaches us that everyday spirituality is not an accessory, but a complete architecture. With it, we organize time, refine our words, and transform experience. And so, without the need for walls or altars, we discover that each day can become a continuous dialogue with God, a whisper that never fades, a sacred structure that we carry within us. Now, let's change the level of interpretation, of exegesis. From the mystical tradition or Kabbalah, Berakhot is not only a legal treatise, it is a spiritual map. Its function is not to regulate mechanical actions, but to order human consciousness to align the lower world, Olam Ha'asiyah, with the higher spiritual world, Olamot Elyonim. In Kabbalah, words, times, and actions are conduits, tzinarot, through which divine energy, Shefa, flows. That is why the Mishnah begins with blessings. The human creation of sacred space does not depend on a physical temple, but on the words spoken with intention. Thus, Berakhot teaches that speaking correctly is building, not speaking correctly is destroying. If we calmly observe the architecture of the Berakhot treatise, a detail appears that at first glance might go unnoticed, but which the mystical tradition views with a knowing smile. 9 chapters. And of course, in rabbinic literature, nothing that is repeated 9 times is accidental. 9 are the sephirot that are revealed. Keter remains hidden, like that higher silence that is never grasped. 9 were also the blessings of the primitive Amidah before it was expanded. And 9 are the months in which a human being is formed. Berakhot, in that sense, is a gestation, the birth of rabbinic practice as we experience it today. Each chapter aligns with a sephirah, as if the treatise were charting a map of spiritual consciousness. The first chapter, dedicated to the times of the Shema, represents Malkut, the kingdom. Here the framework is established, the act of accepting the divine yoke. It is the starting point of all spiritual life. The second chapter, which defines the form and structure of the Shema, is associated with Yesod, the channel of connection, because the Shema is, in essence, a conduit that unites heaven and earth, intention and word. The third chapter, full of dispensations and limitations, breathes hard. It acknowledges our fragility and reminds us that humility is not a decorative option, but a spiritual necessity. The fourth chapter, focused on the times for prayer, vibrates with Netzach, the persistence that overcomes chaos. Daily discipline is not a burden, it is a silent victory. In the fifth chapter, Tiferet, balance emerges. There, it speaks of kavana, of emotion, of reverent awe. It is the beauty that harmonizes rigor and sensitivity. When the treatise enters the territory of the blessings over food, Gevura appears, the sephira that distinguishes and defines. Classifying each blessing is an exercise in spiritual precision. And then comes the 7th chapter, Birkat Hamazon, which unfolds the breadth of chesed, gratitude that expands, that recognizes divine sustenance with inner generosity. The 8th chapter, which orders and organizes the text itself, embodies Binah, the understanding that structures, dissects, and shapes thought. Finally, the 9th chapter looks at the entire world and fills it with blessings. That is the domain of Chokhmah, the wisdom that knows how to see God, even in chaos, in unexpected beauty, in the experience that surprises or disorients us. It is the initial spark that illuminates reality without needing to fully explain it. When we put all this together, we notice that Berakhot not only organizes laws, it proposes a process of tikkun, a rectification of consciousness that ascends from the most concrete, matter, time, the body, to the transcendent. The treatise is an inner ladder, and each step, each chapter, invites us to be born a little more into what we could become. Now we've reached the end, and as I promised you, in just 30 minutes, actually in less than 30 minutes, we completed a comprehensive and in-depth overview of the Tractate of Berachot, and saw how its 9 chapters build the spiritual foundation of Jewish life without a temple. Therefore, if this class provided you with clarity, learning, and a new mental framework, I invite you to continue with the rest of the complete Mishnah course on this same channel. Everything is available for free in our playlists in Spanish and English. Just subscribe to the channel, like this video, and join us on this journey chapter by chapter, tractate by tractate, until we complete the entire Mishnah in more in-depth and academic studies. And if you want more, find more information, extended classes, and study resources on our website, lamishna.com. See you in the next class. Until the next video.